So I want to go over some of the adjustments that this athlete was able to make and why we thought they would benefit him in particular. So we have two swings here. Left is before, right is after. And just using subjective terminology here that hopefully everybody can kind of relate to. We have on the left, I guess, what could be described as like a pushy, spinny, longer swing compared to on the right we have a tighter, more grounded, I guess snappier swing. Again, I get that these are all subjective words, but just bear with me here. We'll go over some of these changes. Now, what we're dealing with here is a very tall, narrow athlete. So what that comes with is a long runway that needs to get exhausted with connective tissue that's going to require some time to deform. So if you think of connective tissue as the slingshot, right? What we're unable to do on the left here is pull this thing back far enough for it to essentially create enough potential energy to use to send energy into the baseball on its own, right? And then on the right, we're able to essentially hit the end of this runway and use that stored energy as the turnaround. Now, an interesting tell that we have here for not reaching the end of this runway on the left is, looking for strategies that he's using instead. And if you look at the right neck on the left, that is his turnaround. So without the ability to hit the end of this runway, that's going to essentially snap the energy back. What he's using is a compensation through the right neck to try and basically send everything back. And you'll see that the head stays left the whole time here, as that right side of the neck becomes the replacement for that overcoming connective tissue that we were hoping to find elsewhere. So vision, pitch recognition implications here. On the right, you can see that we have the neck as essentially a pivot point, whereas the head has to stay left the whole time as we're using the right side of the neck as our connective tissue strategy. So that's just an interesting tell that we have. It's cool to think about how, something like the inability to use up a runway can affect pitch recognition, right? So starting in setup, this is always the place to start, is setup. It's called setup for a reason. So on the left here, you see we got a decently heavy backside, twisted up knee, not going to be able to accept energy very well and send it up to get sent back down and around. On the right, we're kind of off that backside. It's been untwisted. What we have here is essentially the ground, right? And we know that because we can see that all his volume is actually getting pushed upward on the right here. And a good tell for that is you look what's happening up top. And we'll see that he's aligning himself a lot more along this narrow vertical helical axis that he's built on, right? So you see the barrel tick vertical. You'll see everything just sort of essentially become, he essentially verticalizes himself with what he's able to do down below. So allowing himself to align more on this helical angle that he's structured on will actually set up time for him. And earlier I mentioned how it takes time for this athlete to be able to deform his connective tissue enough to be able to use it to catch and send energy back, right? So with this setup on the right, he's got room to work. He's essentially setting up a path to follow to the end of this runway so that he can actually get there. So without the path to get there, it's going to be hard for him to get there, right? So he's setting up that path to the end of this runway on the right very nicely. And then as we just take it through, obviously we talk about the neck strategy. That neck strategy is gone. And we see how that essentially he's staying on this more verticalized helical axis very nicely. Barrel doesn't flatten quite as early. And you'll see actually how the hands, he's essentially working within a much tighter phone booth here than here, where the hands get a little bit drifted outside his base. He doesn't need to use this left leg twisty, reachy strategy to try and hold himself back anymore. And a strategy like that's going to make it really hard to find the ground when it comes down, because you're going to have to twist back out of it, which we will see. Twists back out. Oh, hang on here. twists back out, has trouble finding the ground, pushes through into the front side, never really lands it. And then on the left, we really land that nicely because we don't have to use it as a braking strategy to keep from essentially our momentum from pushing us forward. And now we're able to allow for it to find the ground, and we can turn into it. And then we'll see how, the finish obviously relates to that. He just continues spinning himself into oblivion on the left because he was never able to find the ground because of the compensation he needed to use earlier in the swing to stop himself. And on the right, everything stays nice and tight, ground gets held, all that good sort of stuff. So just an interesting case here, how his structure related to some of the changes that he needed to make, and how once he was able to align more with how his body is designed, how the swing really took care of itself. We didn't really talk about the swing at all. We talked about everything that happened before turnaround, and then once that got set up, the swing really just happened, and he was able to see some nice changes.